one thing that I didn't put down there, just to start all our talk about buying a home and mortgages tonight, is the idea of comparing rental to buying, okay? And often it's a lot more than comparing just the payments on a mortgage versus rental. There's a whole bunch of tax things and other things that we have to consider. And also people always don't consider a lot of expenses on a home that you don't think of before you get into it, but you as a homeowner will find out about. Now, if you look at the sheet there, you'll see that I've broken down homes that you can buy into four types: detached, semi-detached. So detached means a house that is by itself in a yard. Semi-detached would be either mews or row housing or a duplex, where you share a common party wall with someone else. Manufactured home is a polite way of saying what we used to call trailers, okay? And my only thing about trailers is depending on how they're set up, you're going to impact value. So if you just set it up on blocks and don't treat it good, it'll be almost like a car in terms of depreciation. It won't be a good investment for you. Talking as an appraiser, if you take a manufactured home, the newer trailers that are a lot nicer built than the older ones, put it on a good foundation, styroblock with cement, you will have an asset that will almost be like a home and won't depreciate that much. Or if you use screw pilings and do it well, okay? So it's something that you need to consider about on when you're looking at that. Okay, condominiums. This is where you're buying an apartment that's in a major building and it's legally described separately, okay? There, I would caution you on what you're buying, especially in Grand Prairie. A lot of condominiums were initially apartment buildings. They did a bit of reno to them, and then they condominiumized them and sold them off, and you're inheriting a lot of problems, okay? There are some units that I like in Grand Prairie. I'm trying to think of Aberdeen, I think is the one that I'm thinking of. North end of town, which is beautiful cement construction, cement block. I really like that kind of unit. But when I do appraisals and I get into wood frame condos, I get very nervous very quickly, depending on what I'm looking at. Okay, and we've got a number of examples in town. There was one unit, I think, over in the West End that had, within 2 years of being built, had $600,000 to $700,000 worth of expenses that were suddenly charged because the contractor went belly and didn't do a number of things.
Or are we allowed to say names?
What's this? I didn't hear what you said. Okay, but that was a problem for buyers who were suddenly surprised with it. One of the other things I want you to note on condominiums, which is a really bad problem that we have, and it's called the reserve fund. What that is a condominium association should do a reserve study. It should put aside money to maintain the units in the future. And what typically happened in Alberta all too often is the condo association went cheap initially and decided, oh no, we're not spending any money on the roof, on the walls, foundation, a whole bunch of things. So they didn't do a lot of things. And construction is just like a car. If you don't want to maintain it, you get away with it for a while. And all of a sudden, these units had horrible problems 20 years in. And they had enormous amounts of money they needed from people that had bought in. And a lot of people weren't prepared for that. I knew one lady that got a bill for $30,000, $40,000, which is a lot of money for someone to suddenly find because of stuff that hadn't been done for 10 or 15 years that should have been done. So whenever you buy a condominium, I'd be asking questions about that. I'd want to know what that is. Is it up to date? What's the condo association doing every year? Are they a good association, or is it one that it isn't functioning properly and you're buying a headache because it hasn't been maintained?
So just another note on that. Under the Condominium Property Act, the board is required to do a study, a reserve fund study every 5 years, but that doesn't mean they do it. So when you're looking at possible condos to purchase, you want to actually see that they've been doing those studies every 5 years, and you actually want to read the study report, because it'll tell you in there whether or not the money that's being set aside is sufficient.
Yeah, in appraisals, we do reserve fund studies, but a lot of times, maybe they don't get people that really know their stuff, or they're not following along. Okay, and I suspect some units in town get a reputation over time, and as I think in your law practice, you'd probably know some of the headache ones because you've confronted them with your clients before. Yeah. Okay, let's go on and look at how much of a house can you afford. So the first thing you'll notice there is the word down payment. These typically run from 5 to 20%. Okay, and for a lot of young couples first starting off, that's the biggest headache, is somehow getting a down payment together. Okay, and I think I told you other classes, I had an illegal third mortgage. I traded in a coin collection, and I scrimped money from I don't know where else. And I can remember the first home we bought, we had to go through that, and it's pretty tough at times. Okay, conventional mortgage, you need to note this. In Canada, you can borrow up to 80% of the value of a property without getting mortgage insurance. Okay, and that's called conventional financing. We'll look at it later on. Mortgage insurance is very, very expensive. It's insurance for the lender, not for the person who's having to pay for it. Okay, so conventional mortgages, if you can do it, is often the way to go, but it's tough for newer families because, of course, it requires a 20% down payment, which many of them don't have. An insured mortgage, that means that the mortgage is insured by the lender. If they foreclose the property, they will be insured. Okay, so GE Capital, CMHC are the two institutions that do that type of work. Unfortunately, you as a consumer pay for the mortgage insurance, but you're not benefiting from it. Okay, sometimes you may confuse mortgage insurance with insurance that's for disability or sickness, which is something entirely different.
Or credit.
Yeah, where they'll pay out the mortgage if someone passed away or whatever happened. Okay, a pre-approval certificate. This is where couples will go to the bank and they'll ask the bank, how much can we borrow before we shop around for a house? And the bank will give them an idea, you can borrow this amount of money and so on. Now, often to do that, to determine the amount of money you can get, they do and use what's called GDS and TDS. Historically, the ratios at lenders have been around this. GDS is gross debt service, and it means that they will take your monthly income, multiply it by 30%, and that is to cover interest, principal, and taxes. That is historically what we used to do. TDS is total debt service, and it was monthly income times 0.40, and that covered all your debts. So if you had car payments, student loans, other payments, that would impact the amount of mortgage that you could borrow. Okay? Both ratios were used on people. Okay? And these two ratios very, very quickly determined the amount that you could borrow. Now, a good realtor, from what I've seen, usually in a car will ask very casually where you work, what you do, and they've got a pretty good feel very, very quickly as to what you should be looking at, okay? Because they know all about those ratios.
So if you fail at one, you fail?
Typically, okay? But if you were putting in substantial down payment, 30, 40% down, they'd be wiggling around to try to figure out some way of doing it. Yeah. But typically the underwriting for this is CMHC. So the bank is going to, that's the mortgage insurance people, they're going to have to accept whatever it is. Okay? A number of things are no longer done. You're talking to an old mortgage broker from 40 years ago. We used to take a female income, and if the female was under the age of 40, we'd only use half her income. And that's illegal now. And the reason we were doing that is you typically had a young family, they were buying the house, and the lady got pregnant within a year or two and then quit her job. So this is what they were doing, right? To try to cover themselves. Okay, security versus covenant, we've talked about that. Security from the lender's perspective is, what are we lending on? What asset will we take if we're not paid? And that can be an airplane, a boat, or in this case, a house. Okay, so they want to know about that house because they will need to take it if you're not paying on the mortgage. They'll proceed to foreclosure. Covenant, who are we lending to? So it's the couple that we're lending money to. Who are they? Where do they work? What's their credit? What's their net worth? What's their age? This type of thing. Use of RRSP funds, you should note here, and our accountant will look at this in more detail, is that you're allowed to take money out of your RRSP and use it to buy a home. Okay, and then you have 15 years to put that money back in. Okay, it allows you to keep your donation level to the RRSP.
Presumably, if you don't put it in within that time frame, then you actually pay tax on the amount that you withdrew for your down payment.
That's, I think, is true. But it enables you to take it out, keep the contribution room, use it to buy the home, and then in other years you can make it up, right? And get back into it and not lose what you put in. Okay, important things to note on a home. Okay, first thing, stay within your budget. Don't be tempted to try to buy too much, okay, to get talked into that. Okay, location, you want to be able to sell that home later on. So be a bit picky. You want a location that's what? Close to employment, close to stores, close to schools, something that other people would appreciate. So in a Grand Prairie context, don't buy an acreage that's 30 miles out. Buy one that's 7 miles out, because that's kind of the commuter shed, okay? And then you'll have an asset that you can readily sell. Maintenance. This goes back to when you look at a home, realize that there's all kinds of expenses that you will have that you didn't have as a renter, that you're going to be responsible for. And just to go over some of them, you have a power bill, natural gas bill, a water bill, sewage, garbage, okay? Property taxes, which are enormous in Grand Prairie. I think we've got some of the highest property taxes in all of Canada. Okay, condo fees. Sometimes condo fees can be $600-700 attached to the mortgage payments you have to make. So you need to take account of all these things that you're now going to be paying that maybe you didn't pay for before. A really smart move, if I was buying a house, ask to see the bills. Ask to see the heating bill, ask to see the utilities. Get copies of that through the Realtor. Have a quick double check on them. See if there's anything untoward or expensive that you can think of that's a problem for you. Okay, condition of principal components. When you buy a house, there are certain things that you're going to have to replace that you need to know about. Okay, so a roof, to me, from an appraisal standpoint, is 20-25 years. So have a quick look at the tiles and say, okay, what state are they in? When am I going to have to pay that? What's that going to cost? Hot water tank, 10 years. And you could be replacing that component. Okay? Carpeting, I think 20 years. Painting, that kind of stuff, you'll probably be replacing. A biggie is septic systems. So you're buying an acreage property, the septic system's about to go, you need to know that. Because not only will you replace that, but the standards that we have today are much above what they were 40 years ago. And so what you replace it for might be a lot more expensive than you think. Okay, and that's something you should identify before you buy in there.
$40,000.
Easy. Yeah, and it's just a right now. Yeah, so if I was hiring an appraiser, I'd be talking to the guy and say, I want you to identify those things because I need to know that before I get into that property. Okay, school systems. So what are you in a private school? Are you going in the Catholic? Are you in the public system? Where are the schools located in relation to your house? That's an important thing. Fire insurance. Okay, so what are the projections that you would have to pay to insure the place? Typically, how far are you from a hydrant? So if you're out in an acreage and you're telling someone I'm 15 miles from a hydrant, guess what you're going to pay more of? A lot more fire insurance than people in town. Okay? You need to know about hazards, particularly in this area. From an appraisal perspective, anytime I see a property on a bank, I get incredibly nervous very fast. Okay, and that's where I, as an appraiser, cover myself by calling in an engineer right now. Because I've seen a lot of people build stuff like this, 100 feet off or whatever else. If you walk along Bear Creek, you'll see a number of properties that have started to slip. I know of one major lawsuit with the city that was like a $500,000 settlement to stabilize banks. Okay, I think the owner claimed that because you gave me a building permit, you're telling me that it was safe to build. Okay, and that gets the city now very, very nervous. Town of Peace River, behind the hospital, they built 20 homes, and within 2 years, they all started moving down like this. And were all sold for just plywood and scrap. Okay, and here again, major lawsuits and just bad stuff happening. Okay, I think if you're in BC and you're building on top of rock in North Vancouver, great. But anything in Alberta that with the soil conditions we have, be really leery. Ask for an engineer's certificate. Another really good example of this, if you go to Landry Heights, just go up the road there. And every year that road's moving. Right? It's just, they're unstable slopes. Flooding. You need to know when you buy in, are you in a floodplain? Okay? We have, when we do appraisals, towns that we're very worried about. If I get an appraisal in Slave Lake, I'm looking at that very, very carefully. Okay? You can get what's called a map that's a 1 in 100 year flood line, and you want your property above that. Okay? Town of Slave Lake's got some areas that are below that you have to be nervous. Another town that this becomes a great issue is Peace River. Portions of Peace River, depending where you are, below that bank, if you go to the town, they won't tell you. They will not print a map of that because it's politically not saleable. Because there'll be people that won't be able to get insurance then, and they'll yell and scream at town council. But if I was buying a property in Peace River, I'd be paying a lot of attention to that, where I was buying that home. Because periodically it gets flooded. It does. Grand Prairie, there's a little bit by Bear Creek. I know where the museum are, that's floodplain. That should never have been built there. Okay, and a few other areas like that. I think the province has now tried to deal with that. I know in High River, they've said they're going to pay one more time. Then they said never again. The same with Fort Vermilion. And I think on land titles now, I don't know if you've seen it, at the back of the title, they're supposed to put flood hazard, which really means to me, good luck selling that house. Yeah. Right? But it's about time. I mean, anybody buying in High River, even in my living memory, got flooded 3 times. Right. So you can't keep bailing them out. Mm-hmm. Okay, but that's something you need to look at, particularly with insurance. Wood fireplaces, that's another no-no now. Okay, I notice all the latest executive homes are gas fireplace. Wood fireplace, I think, is either turned down or they make an enormous fuss about it, the fire insurance people. Okay, property taxes, very big issue in our area, and it's what? Live in the county, pay half the taxes you do in the city. And the city is one of the most highly taxed cities in Canada. Unfortunately, it's chasing the rich and the upper middle class out of town. Because from an appraisal standpoint, I have got Carriage Lane, Lakeland, I'm trying to think where Crosslinks is, what that's called. Having a senior's moment. Whispering Ridge. You know, I should know that. That's where I live.
Wedgwood.
Wedgwood's another one. These are all Maple Ridge, Taylor Estates. Anybody with any nice new homes is not building them in Grand Prairie. And part of that is property taxes. I live in Whispering Ridge. My taxes are half what I would pay in town. And I've actually done an analysis of it in appraising. It affects property values. Okay, there's a premium paid to be out into the county because you gain from that. Okay, so that's another thing that I would really look into. Okay, personal versus general preferences. Coming back to this again, be very leery of your personal preferences. Always focus on what the general public would want. Why? You don't want to buy a home that fits exactly what you want, and then it's unsaleable because exactly what you want is not what other people want. It's a bad investment. Okay? My classic example of that is where people with substantial income will build beautiful homes in a place like Valley View or Manning, call us up and say, come do the appraisal. And I know they're right. They spent $900,000 building this palace, and I'm the guy that has to tell them, good luck getting $500,000. Because there's no one in those communities, or very few people, that can afford that. And by the way, if they can afford it, they'll build their own dream. They won't buy yours. Right? So always, I think, when you buy real estate, think of what does the general public want, not what I specifically want. And a good idea in a home, I'll see if I can raise this up. Here we go, it actually worked tonight. Whenever you look for home design, those are 3 activities in a home, and look for minimum communication between them. So when you walk in a home, make sure that all the space is effectively used and the hallways are next to nothing. Okay, so let me give you an example of this not happening, which I have seen. So here's a bedroom, and there's the doors, and there's the hall. What's the problem? There are no rooms here. Okay, the design you want is here's the hall, maybe there's a bathroom here, and there's a bedroom here, and another bedroom here, and maybe a bedroom here, and this is kept to what? Minimum, because it's wastage. Okay? So a lot of times you see people that try to build things that they want, and they come up with an awkward interior design or just a bad layout. That will affect value. That affects the sale price. Okay? It's something that you want to avoid. Okay, resale value in communities. You want to buy a property in a community that's growing. One of the things we don't realize about the Peace River block is that not all of the Peace River block is growing. Even when we have a good economy, there's certain towns such as High Level, Slave Lake, Grand Prairie that are growing and are getting more population. There's other towns that are going the other way. So Manning, Valley View, Fairview is an enormously good example. It's either stagnant or actually decreasing in population. So I wouldn't want to buy, well, I'd think twice about buying in a community like Valley View or Hythe. Okay? Because you're not going to get the impact of a growing population on later real estate values. And so that's something important to consider. Another thing I was going to tell you is always look at your local mill. Or whatever the local industry is. If you look at pulp mills, they have a given life. And what you don't want to do is buy into a town that's dependent on a local pulp mill, and that mill is reaching the end of its economic life. Because they're either going to, do major retrofits, as they did down here at Weyerhaeuser, or they're going to build a new mill, or they have the choice of shutting down and leaving town, and now you're in an industry, you've just bought a house, and there's no hope for that town. Okay, so that's something that I would do, especially in the lumber industry, is check the local mill and see where are they at in terms of their life of their plant. Okay, because that'll tell you something about the future of the community. Okay, realtors. Just wanted you to note how they're typically paid, and maybe you've got an update on that. I traditionally had it 7% of the first 100,000, 3% thereafter. Sound about right?
6 and 3.
6% of the first 100?
Is standard now, yeah.
Yeah, and 3% thereafter. But you can negotiate cheaper or try to. There's nothing in law that says you have to follow that when you list with the realtor.
You can negotiate down, but I would always recommend that if you're negotiating down, your realtor agrees to still offer the same half percentage to other realtors who bring a buyer that they would normally get from anybody else. So,
or other realtors will retaliate by having nothing to do with the house that you're trying to sell.
Exactly.
I think we're on about page 2.
So you, even if you go to a 2% realty, you still want that realtor to offer 3 on the first 100 and 1.5 on everything thereafter to anybody else who brings a buyer.
And that's where the fight might be, because the 2% guy is going to be, oh no, and I'm not going to do this, and I'm not. Yeah. So you have to realize what you're buying. Okay, and I think that's a perfectly valid point.
Because otherwise, all the other realtors in town will just boycott your listing. They won't bring their buyers to look at it because they're not going to make the commission.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say with realtors is check out how many sales they've made and who they are. All too often, people pick a realtor by saying, it's my friend, or this guy was nice to me, or whatever. I find, I don't know if you do, but it's like maybe 20% of the guys do 80% of the sales. And often, for many years, being in real estate was a form of disguised unemployment. There were like people, you'd hate to say that, who were in these real estate offices who, I don't know how they lived. It was sort of, well, I'm a realtor. But they really weren't doing that much. So I think can you go to the board and find out the sales volume of realtors from the previous year? I wonder if you could do that.
You might be able to go to their Grand Prairie Real Estate Board and get that.
Yeah, and then get the volumes of who's doing what, and then at least make some hard-nosed decisions. Don't just pick your friend. Okay, you want someone there who's going to get out and really negotiate on your behalf, or if you're selling, someone that knows what they're doing and is get that property sold, and get on with it. Now, I've got a question. We've lucked out tonight. We've got the lawyer. When it comes down to 2 realtors, who do they represent? Is it always the property owner over the buyer? Legally.
So normally what happens when the homeowner lists the property for sale, they enter into a contract with the realtor called a listing agreement. And so in that case, the realtor is acting for the homeowner.
The homeowner.
But sometimes what happens is that same realtor has a buyer client that they bring to that property, and they make a deal with the one realtor, but realtor must get permission and consent of both parties to enter into what's called dual agency. And in that case, you're kind of...
Isn't that a nightmare, though? I mean, if there is a legal dispute, what's going to happen?
It's absolutely a conflict of interest. We do it too. When on occasion, when we have two parties and they're going to enter into a deal and we get them to waive the conflict of interest. It's not always advisable, because then how do you know that you're getting the best deal? Because then it seems like that realtor or that lawyer is just there to facilitate a transaction as opposed to look after the best interest.
So would it be a smart move, just thinking, I'm new to town, I want to buy a house. And I go to the realtor and I say, I want you to act on my behalf. I don't want to look at properties you've got listed. All I want you to do is you act on my behalf.
Yeah.
Does that realtor actually act on my behalf, or are they again acting for owners?
They're only acting for you as the buyer in that.
Well, that's the good news then. And then there's no conflict.
Right. That being said, just be aware that a realtor or a mechanic or a lawyer or a plumber could be a salesman as well, right? And they don't get paid unless you get a deal, right? So there's always that.
So they've got an incentive for you to enter into a contract, which may not be your absolute best contract,
right?
Because they're on commission.
I'm not going to say it happens, but I'm not going to say it doesn't happen either.
Yeah,
so.
it's there. One thing another thing, I'm going to give you a tip here that I confronted sometimes with people, and that is they get with a realtor and they make an offer on a house, they lowball it, and the realtor tells them, I don't want to make that offer. That's too low. Like, you shouldn't do that. This kind of conversation goes on. That upsets me, because I feel like saying, no, try it. So what if you lowball it and the guy counters higher? That's fine. And if your realtor is refusing to do that, I think you can legitimately do what with the realtor? Yeah, off you go. I don't think it's a horrible thing to go out there buying a home, especially in this market right now, make about 6 offers and be called all kinds of crazy, disgusting names. That's fine. And eventually someone's going to say yes, and you've got a great deal. What's wrong with that? Okay? Or what's wrong with closing in on a house and doing, an offer, a counter offer, an offer, a counter? At least get it to the point that, yeah, you're functioning. Don't be embarrassed about it. And I don't think a realtor should be embarrassed about it. Now, in that context, another thing you might get is this clause, which realtors hate. You make an offer, you write on it subject to financing. And everybody in the industry hates that, because it really means you can get out of the offer. Because you can run in and say, what? Well, I didn't find that mortgage at 0.5% that I was thinking of, so goodbye. And I know some realtors will not write that into a contract because of that.
Well, these days, almost all of them do have it. There aren't many that I see that aren't these days.
And they're putting in that word, just the words like that?
Well, it's more specific now.
Yeah.
So the standard area real estate contract that they're using says, at least, or at no more than such and such a percentage.
So they've added something to it. They don't just leave it like that. They add at 3% or less. Yeah. Can you get the idea?
And then, so the other thing, other conditions might be subject to home inspection and subject to, what you really don't want to see is subject to sale of buyer's house. Because
because that puts it all back till this property goes through and so on, right? Another one that I've seen used, this is for appraisers, subject to an accredited appraisal of not less than, and then they write in what it is. So they're saying, I'm buying your house for $400,000, but I'm getting this appraiser to look at it, and if he comes in less than $400,000, then my offer is what? It's not valid. Can you understand the idea? Yeah. So these are various things you can do with the realtor. Okay, home inspectors, I'm having the price $300 to $400. Sound about right? Or higher?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and where you need them, I would say is on properties that are over 10 years old. I think it would be reasonable to get them. I wouldn't get them on a new home. The reason for that is new homes are there's inspections you can get from the city and the county. That's all been covered. They're useful for older homes where there's a lot of renos and you're worried about those things. And you want someone in detail to go through the whole thing and give you an idea of what it's going to cost to repair those things. Okay? Usually they give a big thick report like that, except I think probably half of it's copper plate and they're not responsible for whatever. Okay? I do know that they're one of the most highly sued professions in Canada. I guess everybody has a go with them. Okay? But if I was buying an older property, I would look into that. In this connection, if you're thinking of buying a foreclosure, really be careful. What we've been doing on foreclosures is usually discounting a foreclosure sale by maybe 20% because people offer less, but there's another provision catch there, and this is what it is. Banks that are doing foreclosures have gotten very, very clever at adding an incredible amount of paper to the foreclosure sale, basically saying they won't pay for anything. So when you buy someone's home, if there's stuff that's wrong with the house, you can see a lawyer and begin to sue if they've hidden a bad basement or whatever. With a foreclosure, you can't because the bank's made you sign all this stuff. Okay?
It's all as is, where is.
Yeah.
Representations.
So because you are buying the foreclosure and you can't sue on hidden things, what's the best thing for you to do? Is lowball it like crazy, 20, 30% off, because it's scary. You don't know what you're going to be facing. Okay? And so it's something you need to be a little bit worried about, right? When you get out there and you're looking for home sales. Oh, another biggie for appraising. When you go in the basement, if it's a vertical crack in the cement, I don't mind it so much. Like I can live with that. I kind of look at it, report on it, that's okay. But if you ever see a horizontal crack in the basement wall, leave immediately. Don't buy the house, whatever you do, because that's a home that could easily be in trouble. Our soils are notorious up here for moving with water, and a big horizontal crack means if you can, this is the wall of the basement, it'll go like that. You've got a number of homes like that around Bear Creek, okay? And it's not worth it, okay? And a basement could easily be $40,000, $50,000 to replace it. They have to jackhammer the house and dig around and replace everything, right? So it's kind of a nightmare you want to avoid. Another one that is a biggie here are moles. And the biggie you need to look for is black mold. Okay, and I've been told by some people maybe 10% of homes in town have it. I know I had it in my house. There used to be a friend of mine who was in the insurance business, the emergency repair business. He could actually smell it. I couldn't believe it. I can still remember this guy walking into the basement of my home. It was a fairly large home, and he just went, "You got mold." And it was, I thought, well, you're crazy. And no, he was absolutely right. Okay? What to watch out for when you're on the outside of a house, you'll typically see the wall of the house, here it is, and you may find the dirt looks like this. And what's happened is they filled this in 20 years before and it's settled. So the water does what? It's in here and it's into your basement. Mold needs water to grow. Okay, so it'll be behind the gyprock. Okay, so pay particular attention to the outside of the house. Is it properly drained? Have the eaves troughs been maintained? They're there. I used to have kids, their big game was to grab the bottom eave trough and walk away with it. You know, and then you'd go out there every 3 weeks and discover why your basement had flooded. Okay? So you need to look carefully. I love farmer eaves troughs. You ever seen those? Where they put it coming out from the roof about 6 feet out, they put a post here, and then they drop it well away from the house at each of the corners. Get the water away, and then you won't have the mold problems. Okay? Or look for silly things that people do. The other thing on the house I had that had mold had a roof line like this, and whoever decided to put in a fireplace, instead of putting the fireplace, if you can visualize it like this with the roof line like that, put it like this. So all the water came down, hit an 8-foot wall here, and where did it go? Into the brick, ended up in the basement and produced the mold. Mold's horrible to get rid of. Mold will grow where it's dark and moist. So if it ever gets into your lungs, you've got a major problem, right? So what you want to do, and what I did, my wife was an archivist, I ended up wearing her mask. She used to look at old papers and she'd be worried about mold, so she'd wear a mask. I wore a mask and I cut around the gyprock all the way around the basement, took off the gyprock, and sure enough, the back of it you'd see looks like ink. Remember that old ink, the dry stuff? Black ink? That was the mold. And you just keep cutting everywhere you find it. Then you throw in bleach and bright lights. You know those construction lights? You put them on. And that kills all that mold. But then you've got to replace all the gyprock and everything else. Okay? So that's something to look for. Okay? Pay particular attention to how water drains. It's kind of a biggie. Okay, appraisers. Okay, so here's some tips on appraisals. Make sure the appraiser is qualified. So because of that, you like to look for stamps. And the usual designations we have in Alberta are assessors are allowed to do appraisals. And appraisers have 2 designations, CRA and AACI. So you want them to sign off with their name and that stamp if you're using them. Be leery of hiring an appraiser that's suggested to you by the realtor. Okay? And that is, sometimes appraisers and realtors are perhaps too close. I used to work for an appraisal company. There was a realtor that would show up every Christmas with what we used to call a Texas Mickey. I don't even know if they still have that. It was a bottle of whiskey that was honestly, it was like this.
Costco.
You can get them at Costco. Anyways, I felt this realtor and the guy I worked with were like too close. Okay? So if I was buying property in another community or even here, I picked the appraiser, not the realtor. I want someone totally independent. I don't want someone who's got some type of relationship that I don't know. Okay? You can, on offers, put subject to an accredited appraisal of not less than. So you're buying a house, you may do that 3 times in your life. It's a big ticket item. It might be worth the money to hire an appraisal for $200, $250 and get it done, to get a third-party opinion. And you can put that into the offer. So if it doesn't appraise up to what you think it is, then you get out of the offer or have them lower it. Okay, something like that. Yeah. Be a bit leery of banks ordering appraisals. It's another game that's been going on. And what it is I walk into a bank and the bank says, we're going to order the appraisal, not you. Okay? Then they tell you that the appraisal will cost you $400. Well, in actual fact, they take the order, the $400 from you, they call Toronto, and an appraisal management firm gets someone in town to go out there for $150. And you're the one being ripped off by the bank who insists on the appraisal. So that's something I would negotiate. I'd be at the bank and say, well, I'm fine with that, but I'm not giving you more than $200 for this appraisal. Okay? Another game that used to be played, not so much anymore, the bank would order the appraisal and they would refuse to show you the appraisal even though you paid for it. And that's another one that I don't think I'd put up with. I'd be sort of, I'm paying for it, I get to see it. Right? Okay, negotiating a price. Okay? I think when you negotiate a price, the more information you get, the better. So if I was buying a property in Grand Prairie, I would insist on getting a land title. The beauty of land titles in Alberta is it's public. So if I'm buying Alan's house, I can pull the title on Alan's house and find out what Alan paid. And that's worthwhile knowing because that helps my negotiation. Right? He's got it listed for $400,000 and I know he only paid $330,000. I might be tempted to offer him $340,000. Right? The more information I have, the better. And you can snoop into all kinds of things. You can find out how big Alan's mortgage is and who it's with. You can find all these things on land titles. Okay? As well, you can get assessment data. So all properties in Alberta are assessed as of July the 1st of every year. Assessment data is public. So I'm buying Alan's house. Why don't I find out what the city thinks Alan's house is worth? Because that's going to help me in my offer as well, isn't it? Give me an idea in case Alan's got it listed too high or whatever. Okay, and I know both the county and the city have got it right on their websites. You can just go in as a guest and find out all that information.
I do it all the time.
Yeah, you do the odd snooping just to make sure that something untoward isn't happening that you're going to get stuck with. Yeah. Okay, another thing I'd like you to note is that your offer to purchase is a legal document. So be very leery of people that tell you, oh, it's just a piece of paper, we'll play games with it. Okay, and a typical game that used to be played was you'd put in an offer for, say, $400,000 when you were really buying the place for $350,000, and then you'd arrange the bank to give you a mortgage of $350,000. In other words, you weren't putting anything in. Well, you signed a document. Am I right about it? It's a legal document.
Yeah, and you've just committed mortgage fraud.
That's fraud. That's fraud. And people were far too casual about this. I'm going back 40 years ago. This was a game that was being done all the time.
What would be the point?
Buying property without a down
You
payment.
wouldn't need a down payment if you fraudulently misrepresented to the bank that you were spending $400,000, and the bank will lend at today's rules up to 90%. Then you could get even, you could buy your house and have cash back in your hand.
And from a financial standpoint, it's really great because what you're doing is you're taking all the risk and giving it to the lender. And your return on equity is infinite because you haven't put a nickel in. So if next year the property values go up, it's great. Or if property values go down, you just leave town and give the bank the keys. Or you're more likely just to leave town. Right? So be leery of that. You're signing these documents. Anything that you sign and you're lying on it, it's fraud. Now, is mortgage fraud considered different than fraud? Or it's a criminal charge, isn't it?
Yeah, it would be criminal.
it's a criminal offense to commit fraud. Yeah, so it's serious stuff. Okay, now transaction costs, some of the things that you might want to look at, okay? Back to conventional mortgage, best way to go, we know we can go up to what percentage? 80% with no mortgage insurance, okay? When we go for a conventional mortgage, they're going to look at our credit report, our proof of employment. They'll need a net worth statement saying what we make, financial statements if we're self-employed, all the stuff we talked about last week in terms of what a typical loan is. They're going to be looking at you and saying, have you got the ability to service that mortgage? A high ratio insured mortgage, that means that the bank is getting insurance because you're above 80%. And it's insurance for the lender in case there's a foreclosure. It does nothing for you, but you pay for it. And what they will do is they will take the insurance and add it to the mortgage principal. So I'm going to show you a table here just to show you how incredibly expensive this is. So just have a read on this. This is from CMHC. I downloaded it today. So I'm going to look at you buying a house worth $500,000. You could buy that with a first mortgage and no mortgage insurance at 80%. And if my math is right, I think they give you a mortgage of $400,000. So you'd need a down payment of how much? $100,000. Everybody okay with that?
Plus closing costs.
Plus other costs that you'll be, when you get to the lawyer's office, you'll be surprised exist. Okay? Now, if you want, you could go to CMHC and say, I'm going to pay 95%. I'm going to pay 5% down and get a big 95% mortgage on that. Okay? So to do that, let's use, again, you're going to have a down payment of how much? $25,000? Tell me if I'm wrong. And I'm going to give you a mortgage of how much? $475,000 on your home purchase of $500,000. Can everybody see where I'm getting the numbers? So your down payment is way less. Is that okay?
You need another $20,000.
Okay. Turn over the page here and look what CMHC is going to do to you. They're going to say, oh, you're borrowing 95%. So you must pay us insurance of 4%. Who's the insurance for? For the lender, in case they foreclose you, you don't get anything from that. Every percent on the $475,000, if I'm right, is $4,750. Is that right? Times 4. That's $19,000. That sound right? We okay with that? And then I'm going to, oh no, you'll love this. Now I'm going to take the $19,000, and here's the trick they pull.
They're going to lend it to you over 25 years.
Yes, they're going to add it to the $475,000. And now your mortgage is $494,000. Because they added in the mortgage insurance. To tell you how bad this is, so for you, To get that extra $75,000 in mortgaging, you paid $19,000. Can you understand the math? To get that extra bit, the $75,000, you paid them $19,000. Rule of thumb, 25 years, multiply by 3. So reality is 3 times 20 is 60, less the 3. This is going to cost you $57,000 over 25 years. You're going to pay them back that. For insurance, for who? For them. Now, are all mortgage insurance deals this bad? No. You can see the more you put down, the less the premium they're going to charge you, right? But I'm going to tell you and put it in your notes, do everything you can not to go this way. Figure out whatever you have to do to just go conventional. We okay on that?
Have you seen recent statistics on how frequently the average Canadian homeowner trades up a house? When I got to Grand Prairie, the home builders were saying it was somewhere around 3.5 years.
Every 3.5, they got into a bigger home?
Yeah. Yeah, you owned your home for 3.5 years.
So there's another...
So you barely pay off that premium even before you pay your realtor and your lawyer and whoever else to sell your house. So you're rarely building equity.
And you're going to another house and you're now going to pay another
premium.
Mortgage insurance premium.
Yeah. So it's a very, very bad habit to get into.
And people are often forced into it because Canadians are very bad savers. You go look for couples that have $100,000 available for a down payment. Not many. Okay? So we get into this kind of stuff. And it's a tremendously bad deal for consumers. Now, how can you avoid it? Take a look at your notes. Vendor take-back mortgage. So I'm buying your house. The bank says they'll lend me $400,000. Would you lend me $50,000 for 3 years as a second mortgage, a vendor take-back mortgage? And I'll put $50,000 down. He's giving me a dirty look. He's about to say, no, I'm not going to lend to you.
Well, so a couple of things wrong with that in today's, today. So the first is that not many sellers have that equity, right?
Oh, you mean they're hilted up to the eyeballs too, so they...
Because the majority of the mortgages that we're signing up today are CMHC insured, or high ratio mortgages.
Okay, so then you should look for homes that have a really high mortgage amount and you buy after the other guy paid the mortgage insurance.
Yeah.
That's the trick.
So the other thing is that often the bank would see that as a scenario that was high ratio, because even if you're borrowing money from your parents, right? You can't borrow for your down payment. You can't do that unless they sign a gift letter, right? To get you out of that high ratio. So if you're borrowing part of the down payment from the vendor, I think the bank is going to see that as...
But from a banker's perspective, I don't mind you borrowing $50 from the vendor, as long as my TDS and GDS is still working with the new loan that you've gotten. As long as I got those ratios covered, I'm happy.
Sure. So maybe they would.
But you, as the person selling, may not like it because you're going to have to wait 3 or 4 years to get the rest of your money out.
And it depends on the market. Like if no houses are moving and this is what I have to do to sell my house.
And I think we could be in that market in Grand Prairie right now.
Could be.
Where we could go to people and say, I want a vendor take back.
Yeah.
Or this deal's not going to happen and I'm not paying mortgage insurance. Or another source, what about a second mortgage?
Yeah.
Take over the first mortgage, forget high ratio, new mortgage. Let's get a second mortgage, even though the interest rate's going to be higher.
So what is the
Second mortgage means that another company, household finance, companies like that, they're going to come in and they'll lend the 50. So there'll be a first mortgage and a second mortgage on the property, and you're still only putting $50,000 down.
But the second lender is playing second fiddle. Like the main mortgage company has first dibs if you default, and they have to foreclose. So the second lender is taking a higher risk, even though it's only lending 50. So usually, if it's higher risk to them, they're going to charge you more money. So whereas this guy might charge you 2% for the mortgage today, this one might cost you 8% for the 50. And
But if I'm thinking 3 years of 8%, that still might be a lot cheaper than this puppy here, right? The other problem a second mortgage holder has is that if you go into default, the second mortgage holder, to maintain their position, has to pay on the first mortgage, which is adding to the risk, right? Or just to keep things going.
So to be able to do a comparison mortgage, you need to be able to put
And what I'm suggesting to you, if you don't have 20%, start thinking of relatives or your parents that have some money and give you, what did you call that letter?
Oh, a gift letter.
A gift letter. I am gifting this to you. Or start thinking second mortgage. Or going to the owner of the property saying, look, I'm going to buy it. I want you to give me a mortgage, a vendor take-back mortgage for 3-4 years until, things settle out, and then we'll be set. If you're really lucky, the property value will go up in 3 years, and you can remortgage to pay out the second and end up with just one first mortgage. But avoid the mortgage insurance, whatever you can do. Okay? If you look at it, it's horrendously expensive.
have at least paid. But here in Canada, what are like the legal fees and the closing costs and all that?
It's going to depend on the jurisdiction. Like in BC, there's a property transfer tax that is significant. Now, in Alberta, we don't have a property transfer tax. Legal fees on a $500,000 purchase plus a $400,000 mortgage today, probably $2,500. Other costs might be in the form of an adjustment. So you might have to, depending on the time of year or whatever, you might have to pay half of that year's property. And that's sort of an upfront cost. Normally in following years, it would just be an annual cost.
Are the closing fees dependent on how much the mortgage is?
Yeah, they fluctuate with the value of the purchase price and the mortgage. Yeah.
So if you look at the next part, we've got what are called closing costs. These are costs, when you go to the lawyer's office, other things that the lawyer will bring up that you should be aware of that you're going to have to deal with. You may have appraisal and home inspectors that still have to be paid on the deal. A real property report. Often lenders will want to know that your house actually sits on the lot. So I've had properties where people have been Joe Redneck and have built their properties without getting a surveyor and so on, because who needs that? It's out in the bush, who cares? And what you end up with is a home like this, where in fact a portion of the home is sitting on the other guy's lot. And then it's a nightmare because they have to do an encroachment agreement, or there has to be a re-subdivision done here, or they have an incredible fight. This guy says, you wouldn't believe how much this land is worth, thanks very much. It just goes on and on, okay? So the banks wanted to get rid of that problem. They will say, give us a survey certificate. So give us a piece of paper showing where this house actually sits, and then we'll fund it, and we don't have to worry about that. A real property report can cost you $1,000 or more, It's done by what's called an ALS, Alberta Land Surveyor. You should check out with your lender what they will accept. I've seen it where you walk in, and I know because it was my house, I had a survey report that was 20 years old. The bank refused to accept it on the people buying my home. And all of a sudden they showed up and said, we need a new survey certificate. And I'm going, well, why? The home hasn't moved. It's the same lot. What's your problem? It's the lender. And I ended up having to pay $1,000 more. I was really upset about it. I'm very cheap. Okay, but so this is the kind of thing you have to realize goes on and be aware of it. Okay.
Most lenders today will accept title insurance in lieu of a real property report.
What's title insurance cost?
$250 for a policy that covers the lender and the owner, buyer.
And that might be one way to go.
Yeah. Quite often we see in the contracts, the realtors cross out the provision saying seller will provide real property report with current municipal compliance, and they say title insurance.
Here's the other thing they do too. I had it in my house, is I'd put in a patio, and then I put in a shed, which wasn't on the real property report. And then the city put up an enormous fuss about, well, what's going to happen if the metal shed is not within 4 feet of the fence? What if it's 2 feet in the fence and the world's going to end, and on and on and on. And this is another reason they wanted this guy to show up. Okay? So that a way around is the title insurance. That is a good usage of it because that also covers zoning defects. So if something's been built there that's not right, someone comes later on and says, you have to tear down whatever, i.e. move the shed, well, that's covered. Okay, so best to talk to your realtor about that and be picky on it. The city of Grand Prairie is notorious for, in my opinion, for the survey certificate stuff. I don't know how they got away with that. They must have an in with the local survey company. They could, yeah, someone's making a fortune somewhere. Okay, land transfer taxes, BC and Ontario, that's something you have to take account of that you're going to face. Okay, on closing. Legal fees, what's the average legal fees on a house?
Purchasing is more expensive than selling, just generally because we're doing the mortgage work as well. If it's a cash deal, a cash purchase is the same as a sale. Pretty close anyway. Average total invoice for fees, disbursements, and GST on a purchase, probably $1,500-$1,600.
So the mortgage and transferring the property, around $1,600. So there's something they need to take account of that's going to be present. Okay, fire insurance. The lender is going to want to protect themselves. They're not going to advance the mortgage until you have fire insurance at least equal to what you borrowed from them, and it has to name them as getting the money before you get anything. Okay, so be aware of that. Talk to your insurance broker, find out what's it going to cost to insure the home. That'll be coming up. GST, HST, GST is due on new homes, not existing homes, and you should take account of it. I always got a bit confused with it. Maybe you can tell me about this one. There is a GST rebate that goes to the builder, but all the builders in town are quite clever. They're taking the rebate. So you buy a new home, they get the rebate.
They put in the contract that the buyer will assign the GST rebates back to the builder. That's how it's done.
And that supposedly means that the house is being sold a little bit less to take account of that in our dreams, right?
Yeah.
Only over 400,000. Under 400,000 under you don't pay, right? So
right over.
I know I discovered that.
The
I was
government
in your
figures,
office, as a matter of fact, and this reality so go.
the government figures that if you can pay more than $400 for a new house, you can afford the GST.
I tried this. I said, but yeah, but two of it. My son, how about we split it? No, wouldn't let me do it.
So is GST on the full amount or just the first 40?
Is it graduated?
Is it 7% all the way
It's the
through?
whole shooting match.
Yeah, no, it's, oh, sorry, it's GST on the entire purchase price,
Okay,
but the rebate, I think might be yeah, and I think it's 50% up to that $400,000 price. And so if it's $399.99, you're getting your $10,000 back or whatever it is. But if it's $400,000, you get zero.
oh, so once it goes
Yeah.
a little bit
If it's
higher,
over to 400,
you're
you get
sunk.
nothing back.
so that means you sign up phony offers to purchase at $398,900. And I didn't say that.
So the other thing about GST, though, it's not only on new homes. It could possibly be on. It depends on your intention with how you're dealing with the property. If you're buying a property and flipping, if you're engaged in purchasing, flipping, or purchasing, renovating up to 90%, selling. If you're engaged in a business activity, then you may have to charge, collect, and remit GST.
And that's a biggie for people that are actually contractors. They have to be careful the number of times because typically a contractor will build themselves a home, sell it, and then say, that's my principal residence, I don't owe any money on it, and then keep doing that. They have to be very careful that you don't do that a number of times. Then they begin to call you a contractor. Then they'd show up and say, oh, by the way,
Right.
GST all the way back to all these transactions you did.
So as a buyer, the way you want to protect yourself in the contract is it'll say purchase price, $300,000, and then it'll either say exclusive or inclusive of any applicable GST. So you want to, as a buyer, you want to make sure it says inclusive of any applicable GST. You don't, then it's the seller's problem. If it's applicable, then we just take that amount.
Okay, title insurance. The one thing title insurance you shouldn't be buying it for is if you're worried about the title. If you're in a jurisdiction like the United States, I would be getting title insurance because I would worry about the title. Here in Canada, for instance, in Alberta, we're under the Torrens system. If there's a mistake on your title, the province will pay it. You don't need to worry about that. So in other words, you're buying title insurance here for zoning or avoiding a survey certificate. You're really not buying it to protect your land title. Can everyone understand that? Land titles are basically insured by the province. It creates the titles. Okay, so you're covered that way. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, property tax and utility adjustments. The lawyer's going to have to sit down and figure out who's paid what utilities, who's paid what property taxes, and as of a certain date, when the title transfers, who has to give credits to the other party and back and forth. And you'll see that in a statement that you get given by the lawyers. Loan, life, and disability insurance we talked about before. You can get actual insurance for your mortgage that will pay it out if you're disabled or you pass away or whatever. But please remember that's not what? That's not mortgage insurance. Okay, I don't think they do that nowadays, but I can tell you 40 years ago, some of the bankers were a little bit slipshod about the way they explained mortgage insurance. And a lot of people thought they somehow were getting disability insurance. And no, they weren't. Okay, so be aware of the difference. Mortgage options, amortization, what does that mean? The length of time to pay back the mortgage. So very typically that's 20, 25, 30 years type of thing. Okay? The longer the amortization, the lower the payments. Consumer tip on this, don't go a 30-year. It's not worth it. I've seen big mortgage amounts You drop your payments by $10 and you owe money for another 5 years. Why would you do that? Say, once you get to about 25 years, that's it. Okay? A biblical thing, when's the Jubilee year? Was it every 50 years? Yeah. Mathematically, believe it or not, you can't get amortization more than 50 years affecting the payment, math-wise. So who knew? Okay, term. Okay, term, can you remember this? What's a demand loan? And you have how many days to get the money?
3 days.
3 days. Also true in mortgages. So when you borrow mortgage money, find out the term. The term is the length of time they give you the money, and as long as you're making your payments, they can't ask for the money back. Okay? Very typically, they will renew the mortgage, but not always. Okay? A trick they sometimes do to get out of a community is put interest rates very high on the renewal, and then you go to other lenders, they love it because they're out of that community. Okay? You can get terms that are 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5, even 10-year terms right now. Because interest rate is a risk for the lender, typically the longer the term, the higher the interest rate. I'd advise you right now to lock in as long as you can. I'm doing a farm appraisal right now up in High Level, a fairly big one. Why is the guy getting the appraisal? He's locking in. Because right now, interest rates are so cheap, grab as long a term as you can, 10 years or whatever. I'm a veteran of the 1980s, and I can remember being a mortgage broker. The last mortgage I did, I think, was 21% on a first mortgage. Okay, and I'm telling you, with the way they're printing money, either we're in the Great Depression or we're going to have an inflation like you wouldn't believe. When inflation happens, what happens to interest rates? They'll pump up. So to me, I think you're crazy to go 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year term. Why would you gamble with rates this low? Like, way better to go 5, 10 years, right? And then you don't have to worry about what happens at renewal time, right? That's something you want to do. Yeah.
A 1 year, 2 year, 3 year.
I'm sure they must.
Probably.
Yeah. I wouldn't put it past them. They probably got a 25-year term that matches the amortization. Yeah.
I've never heard of it. And another one more. I've never heard of it.
Yeah, you know, when you listen to the podcast, they always talk about doing about.
Somebody here mentioned to me that they were going to renew their mortgage, and I was like, I'd never heard of that. But maybe I wasn't paying attention.
No, I think you might be right. Because I don't.
Have a look at these mortgage rates. I mean, we were talking about cheap mortgaging. I mean, this is phenomenally cheap. This guy, they're advertising a rate of 1.49%. That's a joke. Okay, and if you look over, this is for Alberta, so this is all the different lenders you can get. BMO TD 1.97 on a first. RBC is what, 2.22? So they're incredibly cheap interest rates. And to me, now is the time, if I had a mortgage, I'd be out fixing it as quick as I could and hanging on to it.
Did Scotiabank not get the memo?
They're not in there? Maybe the mortgage broker hates them.
4.79.
Can't be getting much business.
Well,
No. I'd assume I know my son in Winnipeg just got 2% on a first
yeah,
out of a credit union, so
I've been signing them up at under 2%.
yeah, which, I mean, you cannot. How can you get a better deal than that? Inflation rate alone is 2% right now.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is. So the reality is, in real terms,
It's free.
interest rate is 0. So you'd be crazy not to refinance or do whatever you can.
But At what
Okay.
point is it worth refinancing? Wait, you already have a reasonably low one from I think a couple of years ago. At what point would it actually be worthwhile to go and
Depends
Well-
on your prepayment penalty with your current mortgage.
Yeah, talk to the lender and see what would happen. Okay, you need to find out with a lender if it's monthly payments you're expected to pay or bi-weekly. Some people like paying every 2 weeks. They pay off the loan that much sooner. Okay, so you can check that out with them. Payment option, find out from the lender what you're allowed to pay on the mortgage principal each year. Some mortgages have it, you can pay 20% of the mortgage amount. You know, you get extra money from somewhere, you can pay that, or 10%. I think a really super way to get ahead financially is to pay that mortgage out as quick as you could. When I was doing financial planning, and you know, an interest rate at a bank was 6%, I thought of it as a 6% return if you paid out the mortgage, because now you don't have to pay them. So in effect, you're making 6% on your money. Okay?
Except that you don't have to pay income tax on the money that you save. So I feel it's even
It's even
higher
better.
return,
Yeah.
to pay down.
Yeah, it's one of the smartest thing you can do initially right away to get ahead. Okay, buy a house, get a mortgage, and then pay it out as quick as you can. Okay, you should note the difference between a closed mortgage and an open mortgage, and that goes into what you were talking about. Closed mortgage means that you can't pay it out, or it has provisions that you can pay it out, but you will pay a penalty, prepayment penalty, which could be 3 months, 6 months, even 12 months. I worked for the trust company for a while. It was 12 months. Okay, and they were sitting there, and we played chicken with a contractor. What this guy did is stop paying us. So we had a choice: forego the 12-month payment penalty or foreclose him. And my company was chicken. We elected to let him go, and he could pay us out. Okay, but you don't want to pay chicken with a lender. That's not fun. Okay.
So most of the loan agreements these days say your prepayment penalty is the greater of 3 months interest or the interest differential calculation. And the interest differential calculation is something you would understand, I kind of understand, but takes about 5 pages for them to explain. And so if you signed up originally at 5%, and now their posted rates are 2%. Now you've got a differential of 3 percentage points, right? And so if you've got 2 years left on your term, you've got to pay that interest of 3% times the 2 years to get to the end of the term. That's your penalty. So it's often going to be quite a bit more if interest rates are on their way down.
Yeah, what's happening is the lender wants to match. So there's people here that have put in money at the bank at 2%, and they're lending it out at mortgages here of, say, 5%. Their spread is 3%. They know they're going to make that. They're paying these guys 2% on the money they're depositing at the bank and lending it out here at a higher rate. Now interest rates go down. So let's say interest rates go down to 2%. The bank's in a problem because you'll want to pay this out, go for the 2%. What are they going to do here? Now the money's being lent out at 2%. They'll find someone else to lend it to, but they're only making 2% here on the depositor. They're making 0. Okay? So they don't want to be paid out here, so what do? They charge prepayment penalties or the interest differential. In this case, they're going to say, oh, you can pay us out. Just pay us the 3 percentage points. And that will make sure that we get a profit to pay this and pay for our staff and our building and all the rest. Can everybody see the idea? Okay. You can avoid all of this by going an open mortgage. You'll probably pay 0.5 to 1% higher in interest, but the open mortgage can be prepaid at any time. So if you knew you were going to move in 2 years' time from a city, that might be a good option to go. And then you know that people buying your home can get their own mortgage and whatever, and you won't have to suffer what? Prepayment penalties. Okay, it's something you can avoid. Variable rate mortgage, that is that you have a floating rate mortgage. So it's based on the GIC rate plus 2% or 3%, or you may even have prime plus. So it's bank prime plus 2% and it just floats. Okay? Right now, I would be totally scared of that because I think interest rates are only going one way, which is up. And you'll be sitting on a floating rate and you're going to be in trouble on it. Some people are lucky. They've got built-in contracts where they can fix by calling the bank. And if you're lucky enough to have that, that's super. And then I'd trigger that right away and try to go, a long-term fix. Mortgage financing. Just wanted to quickly do the math for you. A mortgage is an annuity. And we did some annuity formulas a couple of classes ago. Here's what it looks like. So here's the principal that you owe. And you're paying down on a mortgage monthly. And after, say, 25 years, how much will you owe? Nothing. Formula for that we use is this one, which I know by heart because I taught it for 35 years. But on your financial calculators, we can very easily do it by using future value 0, present value, put in the mortgage amount, say $400,000, put in your interest rate, put in the number of payments. So for 25 years, that would be 300. And then you can compute payment off a financial calculator. Okay? And that can give you an idea of how much you owe. Finally, for tonight, capital gains tax in your principal residence. A thing we have to remember is, do we owe capital gains on our home, our principal residence? No. So please note that. It's probably the smartest investment you can make because any increment in value, you keep it. It's not like owning a warehouse where you sell it later on and you're going to get taxed by the government on it. Okay? As well, can you also note, you don't have to name your home as your principal residence. It can be your cottage. So for instance, you live in Toronto and you own this beautiful cottage north of Toronto, which is worth more than your home. A smart tax thing would be to do what? Put the cottage property in as your principal residence, not your home. And you're allowed to do that. Okay, and you can talk to the accountant more on that. He'll explain it to us.
The one thing that's happened recently is that last couple of years, we're now having to report the sale of our principal residence to the government in our income tax returns, even if not yet taxed.
So what he's hinting is that someone in Ottawa is now thinking what?
So hopefully not, but I can't imagine why they would start making us report them if they don't have a long-term plan.
So they're thinking of it. Isn't there some other problem, though, that you have as a lawyer, too? Maybe you can explain this to me. I own a warehouse. I'm an American. I use you for the deal. I sell the warehouse. I make major capital gains, and I leave the country and I don't pay capital gains. The federal government comes and visits you. don't they? Somehow you're legally responsible for that as a lawyer.
So we get a certificate signed by any of our selling clients as to their residence, certifying the fact that they are Canadian residents or not non-residents under the income tax.
And if they're a non-resident, what do?
Then we have a withholding tax.
So then you'll sit there and say, I'm sorry, but I'm going to hold back some of the gain that you made because I'm going to be legally responsible
Get me a letter
for
from
capital
your accountant,
gains.
Yeah, to telling me how much money we need to withhold until we get a clearance letter
From
on that-
CRA?
From CRA on that property.
Okay. How about on residences?
Absolutely. All
So if an American citizen sells a home in Grand Prairie, will they have capital gains? Because they're a non-citizen, right?
presumably, yeah.
And you'll be required to withhold.
Yes.
But do you want, that would be, so you're always looking for that or asking for passports or?
We always get ID.
Okay.
Not always passports, but we get a certificate from them declaring their residence. The other thing, it seems to be most, I'm trying to think here, where I've seen it most often where we've been selling for or on behalf of non-residents is in the estate administration world. I don't see it in my run-of-the-mill real estate practice. I see it in somebody's died and unfortunately appointed an executor who lives out of the country. Then that land is transmitted into the executor's name, and now that trust resides outside of the country, which creates tax problems. And when they go to sell that, we're definitely holding on to the withholding tax until we get a clearance letter from CRA.
So it can be a major mess.
Yeah.
If you got a family that's got 2 Americans in it and 3 Canadians and yeah. So that's about all the stuff we have. Any other questions that people had about real estate?
How is it possible that some sucker would sell my house from under me, unbeknownst to me, then the new guy owns the house?
Say again?
Like you've seen this, eh? Where you know, I'm rich now, and so I spend my February in Florida. So Joe Blow, crook, Jones girlfriend, he somehow sells my house fraudulently to the new guy. New guy pays this guy. I still end up having to move out of my house. So after I call my Uncle Luigi to shoot that guy that just ripped me. Yeah, so how does that even happen? Like, how does that?
So the transaction happens fraudulently by way of big idea.
Yeah, this guy, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Probably a mortgage offer. Signing a and getting not real bank accounts, but in the wrong name. That all goes through, but the buyer wasn't the buyer's fault.
Yeah, it's not my fault either, but we're have to move out. Like, I don't understand how that works. Like, I know it happens, right?
Yeah, for one, the buyer is a bona fide purchaser for value. And so the two of you have, I would say, equal rights. Right? And then what?
Uncle Luigi, that's why. Like, how is that possible? But I have nothing to do with it. I was in Florida playing golf.
The other one they're doing is they're mortgaging the property. You'll come back and you'll get a demand from a bank saying you owe us money. Why don't you pay? And you'll find out you got
Your
a
mortgage will be paid out.
But what happens if you don't have a mortgage, if your house is paid for? Like, do you get money then, or like what happens? You just lose your house?
Yeah, you lose your your house, buddy. You have to
No.
like, split it with the guy that also got ripped off or something.
Well, I haven't actually seen it happen. I haven't seen it play out on the back. I don't know.
I know on mortgage fraud, you're not going to lose your house. There'll be a big fight,
Yeah.
but they'll be looking to make sure you're not involved in it somehow. We did a deal here in town. It was lots in Royal Oaks, 4 lots or 5 lots, and we were asked to do an appraisal, and we went out to them, and it should have had 5 spec homes should be sitting on each of those lots. There was nothing on the lots. They were vacant lots. So I figured out it had to be a crooked appraiser with a crooked contractor, and it was a company that built in 4 different Alberta communities, and they were doing it in all 4. And they got advances based on houses that didn't exist.
So we had one that was a refinance 5 or 6 years ago, where the people came in with and they'd been to the mortgage broker and passed all those tests and didn't raise the red flags. There weren't red flags in our office, and so refinanced and got the margin. Didn't change the title.
Yeah.
But got the, I don't know what it was, $50,000 or something, whatever. Paid out the old mortgage, got the higher mortgage, ran with the cash. I don't know where they went. I mean, our insurance company dealt with it. But,
There's a lot of mortgage fraud. One of the big problems that we have, CMHC is doing financing without appraisals. So what they're doing is they're doing the high ratio mortgages. They're not doing any appraisals. They're doing a regression program in Ottawa to work out the values. So it says value of home is equal to square footage, community age, and so on. And people have learned to play the regression analysis to come up with values that are higher than they should be. And unfortunately, we all pay for that because CMHC is owned by the federal government. I know in the appraisal business, I'm supposed to ask for ID now when I go in, but I've got a problem now with COVID because we've now been told, don't go in the house, it's unsafe. Simply ask the homeowner what's in the home. So, which is totally stupid because if I had a totally rotten home, I'm going to come out and tell Jeff what? It's a wonderful place. The tubs are marble and it's new carpet and it's beautiful.
Just had it repainted.
And it's absolutely totally insane. So I can't believe some of the stuff I see.
Would you recommend, is it good to have credit insurance then? How we talked about mortgage insurance is, that covers the lender.
Yeah, so that's bad.
So that's bad. So then should people have credit insurance?
I don't think that might, depending on the price you're paying, something that pays out the mortgage in case the principal wage earner dies or has a disability.
So the thing with that, though, is that it's what's called declining term. So if your mortgage starts out at $400,000 in that example, over time you're paying down the principal of it. So at some point you're going to get to 300, at some point you're going to get to 200. So the payout, you don't get paid out 400. You get paid out what the balance is at that time. So,
but you're paying
the same premium,
right,
and probably increasing over time for a lower benefit. So if you're worried about the people you leave behind when you die and them having to pay that credit, I would just go and get like a 20-year term policy from insurance company.
For life insurance.
For life insurance.
Right.
Because then it's not declining term. It's always going to pay out 400. And the other thing is the mortgage life credit insurance is attached to the term of your mortgage. So if it was 1 year or 2 year or 5 years, that's the term of that insurance contract. So if you develop an illness in that time frame and then try and reapply, it's going to be that much more difficult or impossible. Whereas if you got a 20-year term policy, you don't have to reapply during that term. If something happens.
Was there anything else we should cover? Some other items that you wanted to talk about, perhaps?
Well, that was one of them. I had a note for declining term. I like to just kind of do it. Can I do a little drawing?
Sure. Why don't you do that? And here's a marker.
Sure. So, we have talked about amortization and term of the mortgage. Two different titles or two different words here. So the bank, so it used to be the case that people didn't borrow money to buy a house like 100 years ago or 150 years ago. They wanted to buy a house, they saved up money, and they paid for the house. I think it was probably a social stigma if you had to borrow money to buy a house. But over time, that has changed, mainly as a result of the availability of credit in our society. So as the availability of credit increases, values of properties go up, and these numbers increase. So in my example, let's say 150 years ago, you had to save up your money. Well, maybe 75 years ago or whatever, 80 years ago, maybe people started borrowing money to buy a house over 5 years. And the term and the amortization matched one another. Okay? So you borrowed money for 5 years and you paid it down to zero in 5 years. Okay? As availability of credit increased and it became less of a social stigma to borrow money, because more and more people started to do it, then you saw the term creeping up. But then as the term crept up to say 10 years, there weren't as many lenders who wanted to enter into a contract for 10 or 15 or 20 years, and because they don't want to have to take the risk that they could maybe be making a higher interest rate 10 years from now if interest rates go up. They don't want to fix into that necessarily. So they developed this kind of binary system where you've got terms and amortizations that do not match each other. So often in Alberta, in Canada, we see probably the term that I see the most often is 5 years. And the amortization that I see the most often is 25 years. I don't think we can do 30 years anymore. I think the rules have changed so that now 25 years is the max amortization. 10 years ago, we were doing up to 40 years, and that was allowable. Now, no longer allowable. So, what's happening, if the average Canadian homeowner is still trading houses every 3.5 or even every 5 years, or 4 years, then often this term is going to be broken. This contract is going to be broken. It's going to be paid out before this happens. So you could change you could refinance if you are buying a new home. Or if you are consolidating debt, often not the greatest idea if you're putting all your debt into a 25-year amortization, paying off your quad, refinancing it over 25 years. Not usually a good idea, but sometimes you're advised to do that by lenders or brokers. So that would be consolidation. So let's say you went out and you got a 25-year amortization. And you got a term of 5 years. But here, you sold your house. And you bought a new house. You go to the bank and you say, I want to buy this new house. It's going to cost me more. So I need a bigger mortgage. But I'm making a little bit more money. So maybe I can afford it. And the bank says, okay, well, what do you want to amortize it over? That's the last time you did 25 years. Okay, how about we plug that into the formula? Always see 25 years. I don't see like 2 years very often. So they re-amortize over 25 years. Okay? So if this was 2020 and what's this, 2045? Well, now and this was 2024. Well, now we just added another 5 years to the lifetime that you have to pay for your home. Okay? So you're going to be 4 years older than you started out at the beginning. Like if you buy your house at 25, you're going to have your home paid off when you're 50. Now you're going to have your home paid off when you're 54. Oh, but then we reconsolidated debt, and the banker told us to amortize over 25 years because that's what we do. And so now we're at whatever we're at. Let's pretend it's 2053. So it happens all the time. And it's a scary thing. It's mathematically impossible to ever pay off your mortgage if you're continually refinancing for an amortization period of 25 years. Yep.
And worse than that, we've seen in the appraisal where we're appraising the same family every 3 or 4 years. They're not moving from their home. The home goes up in value, and they keep mortgaging higher and higher, riding the home value up.
More of the notional equity.
Yeah,
Right?
and just getting further in the hole.
Yeah. So what I tell my clients, I tell them this when we're signing mortgages, but pick a date, like pick an age or a date in your mind. Like by the time I'm 50, by the time I'm 55, I will not have a mortgage. And then when you go to refinance, be disciplined about that and say, can I afford this house or can I afford this new mortgage? Okay, I can if it sticks with, I'm going to have no more mortgage by the time I'm 55, right? Because you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't be surprised, but I sign up people who are 55 years old on a 25-year amortization. Okay? And I don't know if they have a plan to prepay it faster than 25 years. I don't know. So, but it's, I'm 41 years old now, and I'm surprised. I'm 41, and it's happened fast, right? Like when I first bought my first house, I was, 23. So a lot of time has passed.
We used to do, if the guy was 55, now this again is 40 years ago, we wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
And I assume you have to do it because that's age discrimination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't discriminate based on age.
So, are you saying that a person, so it's fine to sell your house and buy a different house, but you should have another 25?
Right. So so if you bought your house when you're 30, and you amortized your first mortgage over 25 years, and then 5 years later you decided to move and buy a different house. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. But the other thing to consider, and Jeff talked about it, is you really have to consider the costs of home ownership. And I don't think Jeff is saying homes are a bad investment. I'm not saying homes are a bad investment. But you have to be prepared. Like property taxes in Grand Prairie, I don't know what the average property taxes are. Probably $4,500, or $4,000 a insurance is probably gonna cost you. Utilities. The CMHC mortgage insurance, if you don't have a conventional mortgage, that is a real cost. Realtors are a real cost. Lawyers are a real cost. So, like if you add $4,000 a year and $2,000 a year for insurance and
Maintenance, 10% of.
maintenance, yeah,
10% a year.
like I don't know, whatever, $5,000 to $10,000 a year, pretty easily. If you add at the end of it when you're selling it, you're spending $20,000 on a realtor, and you spent $20,000 or $60,000 on mortgage insurance over the there's just lots of added costs. So, you know, if you're spending $1,200 on rent, I don't know, $1,500 on rent, and you go and you look at mortgage payments and you're like, oh, $1,500, I can afford that. Well, not just that. So my advice is pick a home that you think you can be in for 10 years, stay there for 10 years. Yeah, because it's going to take you 5 years to pay off all the other crap, so that you're actually building real equity.
I was going to mention something else and see if you've heard about it. I got told the other day that anybody that has gone on mortgage deferral, that program,
Yeah.
when they go in for a new mortgage, will be told, no, you've got bad credit,
Oh, I haven't heard that. Huh.
which is something that's going to negatively impact the market big time.
Interesting.
So, like, anytime in the future they'll be told no?
Well, now.
Like, oh, so,
So I went in and applied for a deferral on my mortgage because I thought, well, I really don't need it, but hey, why not?
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking of buying another house. I can't get approved for a mortgage. It's like having bad credit.
I've heard that about the well, this is just what I heard.
I don't know.
Oh, you're living off the government payment. You can't use that as a true income at the bank.
Should you be buying a house?
So those were just the comments
No,
that
that's great.
I had. Yeah. Don't re-amortize over 25 years over and over again. Bad idea. Consider the real cost of home ownership are real, and you have.
And this fits in with financial planning because when you retire, you need to be out of debt because your income's going to take a major blow. And this type of thing, there's going to be all kinds of people that are 65 and guess what? They still own the home.
So I have a question. For me and we own a home. And don't have, like, we don't have to add debt. Like, but we might have issues in, like, the attic or whatever. Like, what does a person do if you have to get it clear if you have or problems with your house? Like, you have to deal with the problems with the house.
Yeah.
So then you just have to, like, get an alcohol.
Do you know if you have any room, like, between the value of your house and the amount that you currently owe on your mortgage?
I don't know.
remember how much you borrowed, like what value, like did you, is it a high ratio mortgage?
It is, yeah, like we put.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the options are limited, right? The options are maybe if there's any equity in there, be able to refinance, but then the way that refinancing, control mortgage, the legal fees, they're, yeah, work, and if it doesn't work, help you.
Yeah.
I listened to a podcast the other day. There's a lady, she finances millennials. She said it, I think, was a really good thing. She said that people my age need to be more honest with young people about how much help we got getting into our house. Like, so many of us, our parents put in, like, mum and dad put in, all these things. She said because what happens with the younger generation is they think that their parents did it on their own. And so they should be able to do it on their own. And so then they end up, buying too soon, buying too big, because, well, mum and dad got a house when they were 22. Or yeah, because their mum and dad gave them, at that time, 10 grand or whatever, which is all you need. So I think there's a lot of, I thought it was a really good point that my generation needs to be more honest with, hey, we didn't do this on our own, our parents helped us, our uncles helped, and take the pressure off people. Like Tim said, well, maybe they bought the first home at 30, and people are like, 30, man, you're supposed dead at 30, you got to be in there when you're 24, 22,
Right.
Well, no, not unless your mum and dad are going to do like their mum and dad did. Well, yeah, here's $100,000, here's, you know what I mean? And I think because we don't do any favors, the younger generation, giving them the impression that, yeah, we did it wrong. Plus, our education costs were like, to now. So there's all these, I think socially we have not put pressure on your guys' generation. Not even on purpose, but just by not saying, oh yeah, grandma gave me 50 grand, that's how come we could him it down.
Even the house that I grew up in was 5 bedrooms, huge lot, like beautiful home, and my parents paid less than I paid for our trailer that we live in. And it's like it's impossible now. It feels like,
And you're lucky. Go to Vancouver.
Oh yeah, well, I know, I'm thankful.
It's the end of the world.
I know.
So for me, halfway between the generations, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do it without my parents. My dad came on title with my wife, our first home. So we didn't need a gift letter because he was on title for the $40,000 down payment. Then he died, and we did have mortgage life insurance, which normally I wouldn't recommend because it's just a bad deal. Right. But in that case, it worked in our favor. So then we paid back my mom the down payment, and then we took that other chunk, and that started our. Then we could put it into a business, and like it just rolled, right? Or we were living in a house here in town, and a quarter section of land came up that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to buy. My mom was like, sure, I'll give you the money. And we bought that, and we paid her back. But like we wouldn't have, you didn't charge us the same interest rate that the banks did.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, Alan's right. Didn't do it.
I think another thing that part of the reason I'm here is, and I've talked to friends as well, but it's like I don't think most of this stuff is taught. I don't know, I think we underestimate the power of all this advertising, and then we see your neighbors, and so like people, it's just natural. Heads and like, you learn, everyone I think is learning the hard way, unless you're lucky enough to have a few mentors who taught.
Yeah.
And so I think, but one thing I know I get into look at what can you sell, how can you money, like if you start, rather than looking just at the problem, a lot of times there's more money available. So we just look at it. Can we get rid of this? But
And then he also talked
Yeah, I believe that's how I got. I looked at like, all right, I put everything on paper.
Mm-hmm.
I realized, okay, this is what I owe, and then I saw the percentages, and I paid off stuff like that I could have, and then I those payments. That's what mine has been. And it's going really well, but
It gives you goals.
it gives you goals, kind of nice. But
It does feel overwhelming.
but it's those little goals, and then when you're able to kind of roll off, it's nice.
Trouble though, if there's a hole in your roof, fix it.
Yeah.
And then it's a whole different ball of wax.
So thanks very much. That's good. And maybe we'll shut it down. We're at 9 o'clock. So we've ended off homes, and I think next week we look at mutual funds. That's what we've got coming up, and we've got a financial planner that's going to show up here. And you're coming back in about 3 weeks, aren't you?
Yeah, which, it's in my email.
Yeah. So you'll have an entire class you're going to be doing.
Wills and estate planning kind of stuff.
And hopefully something on prenuptial agreements,
Ooh. Okay.
because that's a biggie for me.